I think we should talk about whatever comes to mind now that we're live.
We're live.
Hello.
This is Mike Lafferty, host of the BAMF podcast, and we were going to be talking to Owen Stevens today, but he had car trouble, and Owen won't be joining us to talk about Starfinder. So sorry, Owen. Hope to reschedule with you. We will instead today be talking about science fiction and sci-fi RPGs, and I just kind of interrupted an argument before we started about Jacob trashing Aid's choice for playing Traveler. You care to explain yourself, Jacob?
I'm sorry. I'm just not a fan of Traveler, and I really never have been, especially since it's one of those few games where you can die during character creation.
That just makes it great.
Best session zero ever. Everybody dies in character creation. We all go out for burgers and beer.
I just don't find Traveler exciting or interesting, and I have had many people try to get me into Traveler games, and every time it has been boring. I apologize to people who love Traveler. It's not my game. I need excitement and entertainment. I need, like a Star Wars game or something.
And to be honest with you, a Traveler to me has always been a great testament to the power of world building in an RPG, because until technology advances a lot more than it already has, there will never be anything like the amount of world building that you can do in an RPG setting. And we were chatting about world building basically before we sort of surprised went on the air. But to me, that Traveler universe is just so great, and there's just so much in it and so much been done with it. It sort of succeeds in spite of the fact that it's never had a really satisfactory system attached to it. And, I keep thinking, one of these days, maybe somebody will take that world and match it to a halfway decent system, and that will be something quite spectacular to behold. But the fact that, we're still talking about this game after 40 years and still have strong opinions of it, they did something right. And I think the thing they did right was in the world building.
I'm really enjoying second edition Traveler by Mongoose. I like the system. I had the first edition ages ago when it long time ago, and never got anything but the core book because just didn't have anything going on at the time. And then the group I play with at the moment, we said, okay, what do you want to try? We'll try Traveler. I've got that as well. And yeah, it's weird. It's got some kind of like kooky 70s science fiction ideas in it that kind of mixed in there, and you can kind of extrapolate those if you don't want to. If you don't like those, get rid of them. Change the names of alien race and stuff like that. But the sessions we've been running recently, it's pretty much seems to be like every man in space. It's like blue collar workers in space. We've got to deliver this stuff. But all the kind of like the trading part of it is like can be done as like almost like a sideline. Yeah. So you do your okay. You're going to go from here to here to do this mission. But if you've got 50,000 credits flying around, you can also buy some gear out from this end and ship it to that end and make 75,000 on the other end. So off you go. So I really like it. I'm really enjoying it. It's got some quirks in it, just setting wise, because the tech levels are kind of almost lower than people would have expected when those were introduced in the 70s. So it's like, okay, have we got internet access? Well, meh. Can we communicate to other planets? Well, not really. Can we? Yeah. So it's there's a limit to stuff, but that also makes it quite interesting because they've thought around that. There is like a messenger pod that literally travels like from planet to planet to planet, taking stuff from that happens in the core world out to the outside thing. I think we worked out it would take like 4 to 5 months or something for something that happened in the core world to reach the outer rims. Now that's quite interesting for story, that something could happen and no one would even know about it until it literally was on their doorstep. Because so it's different from Star Trek, it's different from Star Wars. But it's just what I'm playing at the moment.
Hey, we should introduce everybody who's on the podcast right now. Long-time listeners probably know, but let's say there's a guy who's new to the BAMF podcast and just found us in the new and noteworthy section of iTunes. And he's like, hey, who are these clever and handsome motherfuckers? We should introduce ourselves. I'm Mike Lafferty, I'm the host. Walt Rebelliard, say hi, Walt.
Hi, Walt.
He is the co-host. Aid, who was just speaking about the virtues of Traveler. He is Aid Smith, owns Mesozoic Press, and he's also does a lot of the layout and art for Feed and Goat Games and various other publishers. Jacob Blackman, say hi, Jacob.
Hello, how are you?
Jacob, you want to give your quick rundown?
I'm a freelance artist. I also produce a number of gaming supplements for Rogue Genius Games called the Superpowered Legends, and I do a whole bunch of stock art for a variety of companies.
And last but not least is Mr. Chris McLaughlin. Chris, how should we introduce you these days in terms of what you're doing for gaming?
Professor and unemployed has-been who opens up van shows with a board.
See, RPG superstar. That's it. That's what it is, man. That's just what it is.
Yeah. Well, there's one of my all-time favorite lines in movie history is when Paul Williams and Pat McCormick walk up on Burt Reynolds. He's in the hammock and Smokey and the Bandit, and Paul Williams gets off the line. And it looks to me like a legend and an out-of-work bum look an awful lot alike. And there you go. That's me. Legend / out-of-work bum. There you go.
Until we get you your Lucha Libre mask and cool stage name.
No, well, I think you fail to appreciate just how much my co-writer Darren Watts and Jason Walters own the Lucha mask thing. I mean, they accepted like a half a dozen Emmy awards wearing Lucha masks. So I think they rightly own that gimmick.
Well, someone's got to. And since you mentioned everyone else is writing particulars, Walt Robillard owns Hazard Studios, and they put out a lot of fun gaming products, including Supers! A really fun Supers RPG.
Damn straight.
So hey, favorite sci-fi RPGs. Aid likes Traveler, and Chris.
I didn't say it was my favorite. Just said it was what I was playing at the moment.
Oh,
all right. So what's your favorite?
Well. That's a very good question.
Star Frontiers?
I've got a box set of that, but I've never played it. Never played it. Yeah, it's probably got. I mean, we did do a lot of West End Games D6 Star Wars for quite a while. That was pretty damn cool.
So, seeing as you own the box set, when are we getting online for an actual play of this?
I don't know where it is. That's the problem. Okay. Again, a very limited playtime I ever took with it. The second edition based Buck Rogers role playing game. I really like that. That's a kind of left field thing. And of course, I have to put a good quote in because obviously I've done some work for them. Is the new Star Trek Adventures role playing game as well, which I think is particularly good.
Yeah, I guess once you get into sci-fi RPGs, seems like a lot of the ones people have fond memories of are going to be your license settings, your Star Wars, your Doctor Who's, your Battlestar Galacticas, your Treks. So, anyone have a particular favorite licensed property they'd like to talk about?
Oh my gosh! I have to speak up for the various Star Trek RPGs over the years. You know, the very first time in my life that I accidentally stayed up till dawn without realizing it was that blessed day that I called War Games West and had a copy of the old FASA Trek game sent to me in Southwest Virginia, and I just read that thing from cover to cover, and I lost literally like 8 hours past. I didn't even realize it. I was just so blown away that somebody else loved Star Trek as much as I did and made a freaking game out of it. And even though that is kind of the definition of a clunky system, the amount of love that went into that game, that will always have a very, very, very big place in my heart.
Let me ask you a question. When you found yourself playing that game, did it feel, like the Star Trek universe?
It did, because, like I said, these guys had really done their research on it. The only thing that really, really, really threw me was they had decided to update to import this like really, really, really arcane combat system from another forgotten FASA property called Gravball. And to me, it's still the most baffling combat system I've ever come across this side of like Phoenix Command. So once I just completely threw that combat system out, it played a lot better. But just having so much invested into a tactical combat system that didn't work, that was that's really going to be a big chunk, because it was obviously 1980s is going to be totally original series. So I want to go to a space bar and punch a Klingon who compared me to a Regulan bloodworm and stuff like that, and that combat system was just as inappropriate AF. I mean, other than God bless them trying to weld the Millennium's End combat system on the Babylon 5, it's the weirdest matchup of system and property I think I've ever seen.
I can't even remember it. I remember obviously the core system was Deep Percentile based, but I do not remember the combat system at all.
Well,
Did it have action points in it? Am I thinking action points?
Yeah, everybody had a certain number of action points, which and like the various actions that you did were cost you a certain number of points, and I was totally down with all that. But it's just the fact that like it had this like really clumsy like sort of a earlier, even worse version of of attacks of opportunity from 3rd edition D&D.
Hey Chris, did this have anything to do with what's that miniatures game to make you don't know what I'm talking about? Oh God, it's on the tip of my tongue. They got the license from Paramount in the late 70s, and it's this tactical miniatures game. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm drawing a blank. Sorry.
I can't think of anything.
Okay, I'll look it up. Sorry.
Yeah, I know they imported the system from another game they had called Grav Ball, and the fact that I'm the only one here or listening to this that has ever heard of Grav Ball, it should tell you what a success that system was not.
Didn't the Doctor Who Phaser system was that the same or was that different?
Oh God, it might. Now that you mention it, it might have, but just
Starfleet Battles.
Starfleet Battles. Oh no, totally different company had that license. No,
okay.
Completely separate deal.
That's fun.
Oh God, well I think Doctor Who actually did use that combat system, but you feel a bad combat system a lot more in Star Trek than you ever will in Doctor Who, unless somebody's running a really messed up Doctor Who campaign. Yeah, you may be totally right there.
All right. Well, so that would be sounds like Chris's old school favorite. Walt, what about you?
Well, I'll start with the precedent that Aid set. Sci-fi game I'm currently playing, White Star. Love it. Nice and simple, old school, kind of D&D 0 edition clone. Very, very easy to adapt and mess with, so that's cool. But I have to admit that when I was in the Army and looking for games and you could only find so many, I was addicted to BattleTech tournaments for quite some time. The big, huge, giant terrain models, and you broke out your battle mechs, and then that transition to my deep and love-abiding thing for a mech warrior. That system was, oh boy, that was some rough gaming. And then you would combine the two. You would play your role-playing game with Mech Warrior, and then when you had to get into mechs, those books got flung across the side of the table, and everybody ran for their BattleTech stuff. And oh my God, there was nothing more annoying and interesting than tracking the heat of your mech and using tricks to blow off the heat and stuff like that. And God forbid if you didn't torso twist before you went after a person. Oh dear.
I really hated the heat rules. Go ahead.
I was going to say, last time we were talking about it, Dom Sumner, a friend of the podcast, had come up with a really neat slide rule kind of tracking sheet that he put together with some laminated paper and a penny to track heat. And that worked. That he said that worked really well. But oh my God, that was just such an addiction back in the early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah, I had a buddy who was stationed in Germany during that time frame, and they were playing BattleTech Mech Warrior with intricately painted. In those days, you hand painted all your miniatures, and they decided to kind of up the ante, if you will, in combat. If you lost a combat, your opponent, if I was the GM or another player, however they're doing that night, they kept a hammer at the table.
See where this is going.
Yeah, you can kind of, once I say that, how it's going to wind up. But if you lost, the other guy got to smash up your lovingly painted miniature right there in front of you, and made things a bit more interesting, apparently.
Then I would say you better pay me for that, because that thing cost me $10.
And I'm still holding the hammer.
Let's say nowadays it probably cost about $40, wouldn't it, for freaking Mech Warriors? It would be absolutely crazy money nowadays.
Well, they've never been cheap, but yeah.
I just got to say that the greatest sidestepping of a copyright ever was when I think it was the 3055 mech book came out, because they had these huge books of all these different mechs, and it was broken down by years and by interstellar territory and stuff like that. But the greatest sidestepping of a copyright I've ever seen was these things called LAMs. So they were called an acronym for Land Air Mech. Blatant rip of ripoff of Robotech. You know,
No.
that and
No, of course not. Never seen that before ever in Transformers or anything. Never before.
Right. And then they had the what do you call it? They had the the Destroyer Mecha. No, Marauder, which was the Zentradi battle pods. You know, and it was just like wow, you guys are slick. You guys are so slick. This is awesome. So yeah, that was funny.
So Jacob, I don't think you've weighed in yet on a favorite sci-fi system.
Oh, I'd be hard pressed to say which one was my favorite. I have a lot of good memories of sci-fi games of the past. The one I played the most was certainly Cyberpunk.
Wow!
Great,
yeah,
great stuff.
And yeah, a lot of good Cyberpunk memories. Although in terms of genre, when it comes to Cyberpunk, my favorite has to be Shadowrun. Because then you get to incorporate all with all the cybernetics and net running and all that. You get to include magic and orcs and all that. And you know, more fun. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I'm looking forward to Starfinder, is because, you know, you get all the classic sci-fi tropes. You know, you're going to get cybernetics, you're going to get spaceships and magic. So it's everything you want. That I'm looking forward to.
Have you had a chance to take a look at the setting or anything for
only what's been released online? You know, I was at PaizoCon, so I got to look at some people getting to actually play the games, but it was mostly me looking over their shoulders and watching, because trying to get into one of those games was impossible.
So is it really D&D with spaceships, or is there something else?
It's Pathfinder, which is basically third edition D&D. But they've modified the system pretty heavily to make it flow smoother than third edition ever has.
Okay.
Do you know what kind of advancements they've made?
There's a lot of differences in character creation. For instance, you know, from what I've seen in the past, your race really heavily bent what class you'd want to play. And these for Starfinder, they've actually made it where the race is you can play any class and still be good at it. So that's a nice benefit. Then you get to choose like a background package where, you know, you could be like an icon or a mercenary, so a celebrity or a former soldier or something, and that gives you additional abilities, and then you choose your class. So, you know, it's looking fun.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it coming out myself. Chris, you had Star Trek. Jacob, you said Cyberpunk. Aid, you said Traveling Buck Rogers, and Walt, you were MechWarrior and BattleTech, right?
Yeah. How about you, Mike? What was your old school grog?
I have not played a lot of science fiction RPGs. I played BattleTech and MechWarrior a little bit, and I thought they were just okay. I played Star Frontiers once, and I liked the setting and really, really hated just the system. So I gotta say, I haven't really had a good experience with a science fiction RPG that I would say I want to go back to. I played in a friend's completely homebrew, kind of based off GURPS fighting mech and anime setting sort of game in Tucson like 17 years ago. And that was a pretty good time, but that's probably the most fun I've had with a science fiction RPG. Usually my better RPG experiences have either been superheroes or, you know, occasionally a fantasy setting. So don't really have one. I would love to be in a great Star Wars game. I've read some of the Star Wars books and thought they were cool, but I've just never. I've been in one Star Wars game once, and it was this guy had read a Star Wars graphic novel he really, really liked, and he really, really wanted to GM it, and there really, really wasn't much for us to do except watch Luke Skywalker and say, "Yay, go Luke!" So
I ran a pretty successful Star Wars game on the second iteration of when they translated it to third edition.
This would be the WotC version?
Yeah.
The Saga one.
Not Saga, the one they put out just before Saga.
The Yeah, the second edition. Yes, yeah, it got very confusing with Wizards, wasn't it?
Yeah, the second edition Star Wars, which was based on the third edition rules.
Yes, yes. The one with Anakin on the front. Yes.
Yeah, I ran a pretty successful Star Wars game using that system. Saga looked good, but I've never actually played it, so I cannot attest to its system.
I own pretty much everything from the first two systems the Wizards put out, and most of the Saga system, but only touched on it, one or two sessions. Mm-hmm. But they are very similar. There are differences, but they're similar enough that you could probably translate one from the other. That's what I say, but that's me talking at arm's length because obviously I've not gone quite deep into it. But again, it was a good system. I remember when Wizards first got the license, it's like, oh my god, Obi-Wan Kenobi's got 17 strength. That's really cool. So that was really good to see third edition stats for a Star Wars character. Just bizarre. So
yeah. I also like the look of the current Star Wars game system by Fantasy Flight Games. Mm-hmm. It looks really good. I have a lot of the books because they're fun to read, but I haven't actually gotten to play it yet.
Yeah.
So that is an issue there. But it looks solid, and I would recommend if you can get into a game with the Fantasy Flight system, try that. You might enjoy that.
Yeah, the biggest hurdle for that though is the dice, because the dice are not numbered. But there's a good number of actual plays out there that they actually some of them even film the dice rolls so that you could watch like how the dice are supposed to work. So I mean, if anybody gets caught, they can check those out.
That's kind of, man, I like to do an actual play like that, but good lord, how do you film your dice? I mean, you have to
you have to have a specific camera that's literally just focused on that little one area.
Pretty much, but it was all people around the same table. So I mean,
that makes a big difference. Sort of like some of those World Series of Poker shows.
Picture. Always roll a 12.
If we do something like that, we need to have Aid as the announcer.
The British accent kind of gives us a impression of class that we're probably not entitled to otherwise. So.
Oh my God, I could listen to you read your grocery list. Just to hear you say I nicked some mustard off the shelf. That would be fantastic.
I've not got that good an accent. Trust me. It's just regular rubbish.
In terms of, isn't there a miniature Kickstarter right now called Dive by Hawkman?
Jacob, did you not post about that?
Yes, Dive by Hawkman. That looks pretty good.
Is that a miniature game or what is that?
No, it's just a series of Golden Age style miniatures where this guy really likes the classic, serial science fiction look of the Hawkmen, and he based them. He based them a lot over the spectrum of various Flash Gordon series, more towards the 30s and 40s series than the 80s, and these guys are gorgeous. They have these little hawk helmets and jetpacks. If you want to be more traditional, you can opt to get wings instead of jetpacks. And so you can make them look like actual Hawkmen if you want, and it's pretty cool. And if you get on several different levels, there are current stretch goals where you can get an exuberant human or the exuberant Earthling who looks very much like the 1980s Flash Gordon hero. And if they can hit $5,000 before the Kickstarter ends.
Well, that's like $50 away right now.
Which actually they are at $49.94. They are $6 away, and they have 35 hours to go.
So we're going to post this podcast right away, so we can.
If they can get $5,000 or pounds, it's pounds. Everyone who has got in on at least the 50-pound level gets an evil overlord who looks very much like a Ming the Merciless, and so I'm really giddy to get those figures.
Huh. You know what? They just made it because I backed it. So
Yeah,
real time, motherfucker, real time. This is live broadcast television.
I used to teach at a school in Southern Virginia, which will remain nameless. But I knew I was pretty much done there when I wandered into the main office, and I actually heard my boss over saying, "Professor McGee alive? What do you mean?"
Yeah, they even
fire
have
all weapons.
They even have a King of the Hawkmen figure who the description is by the blessed beard, hail to the king. So it looks very much like Brian Blessed. It's wonderful.
I really hate to say it, but I would watch just a Brian Blessed, mini series, cartoon, whatever they would want to do with that. Just The Adventures of Voltan as he raids the skies above Mongo, as a cartoon on Netflix. I would be all over that.
The thing is, he's like it all the time. That's what's so crazy about him. I've seen it. He's in Doctor Who, and he plays pretty much the same guy. And he's been on game shows, QI, and he's just like that all the time. It's absolutely fantastic. The guy is a legend. The guy's been up like mountains and lost fingers and stuff to cut frostbite and stuff, but he's bellowing away. Love him.
I'd love to get him to substitute teach for me sometime. You want to go to the bathroom? Oh man, dream.
I saw a meme from my buddy Rich Howard, who runs the Whelmed podcast, and he was talking about how his 5-year-old child held up the DVD of Flash Gordon, the 80s Flash Gordon, and it's like, "Dad, can we watch this today?" And his reaction was he posts a picture of Brian Blessed going, "Dive!"
That is a beautiful thing. Oh, hey, speaking of charismatic British personalities, Warren Ellis has written a Castlevania TV show on Netflix, and I just watched it last week, and it's the best TV show I've ever read that was based on a video game. I watched it.
I have to agree.
Yeah, if you like Warren Ellis's comics,
better than the Pac-Man animated series.
It's a close thing, sir, but I would say so.
Well, Kevin and whatever that was called.
Yeah, it's definitely Warren Ellis. You have a main character who wakes up drunk under a tree and doesn't really want to do anything, but kind of gets coaxed into doing all these things. But for a guy who hated comic books as much as he seemed to in the '90s, Warren Ellis sure seems to wind up writing, either comic books or this kind of cheesy pop culture. He previously did an anime, wrote a cartoon based on G.I. Joe like 7 years back. So
that was good.
It was really good. It had an action movie aesthetic to it. But I just remember him saying, back in the 90s on his blog, that there's just not much left to say in terms of American superhero comics, and I hope to be out of this field in a couple of years.
You remind me of my re-entry into comics after a decade away. I plunked down into comics right around 92 or 93, and I was playing catch up. One of the first things I went back and looked at was this Watchmen that I heard so much about, and I went in a whole hog. I got like this snazzy leather-bound edition with a special Alan Moore introduction, and it was written right about the time that I think he was starting to bottom out with DC, because it was all basically about I almost regret writing Watchmen because I pretty much killed superhero comics dead, and I feel kind of bad about that. And it was funny reading this in 1992 because at the time he was doing work for hire for Image.
Mm-hmm. Of course, Supreme stuff. Yeah, that
I'm thinking, well, you killed him dead, but apparently if there are enough zeros on Todd McFarlane's check, you're good, man.
Yeah, he'll do a weekend at Bernie's, figuratively with his career if there's enough money involved. Well, all those spell components and from Black Cat familiars don't pay for themselves, Chris.
The Snake God has his price, apparently.
And let's not forget the elves that live in his beard.
Yeah, but they were there. They've been there since he hit puberty,
And I had something for Snake God and elves and beard, but I forgot completely. So, hey, all right. So, talked about games. Favorite science fiction movie plot or movie, TV show or book. Walt, go.
Excuse me. Killjoys, Dark Matter. Those are so much fun. Especially the quippy lines on Killjoys. More nerd shit. I love when the big burly Killjoy bounty hunter comes in and he's like, "You two, put your differences aside. More nerd shit." Stuff like that is fun. If you guys are not reading salvagers, you're doing yourself a disservice, especially if you love Killjoys. The basic premise is what happens when the Death Star blows up, and who's going to clean up this mess. It's such a good read.
For anyone who might not be aware, Killjoys is a fun sci-fi TV show about bounty hunters in a let's call it a Firefly-esque setting. And I think it's a sci-fi show here on Netflix right now, and Walt introduced me to it. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, and they just announced the other day too that although they haven't done a crossover yet, Dark Matter and Killjoys are in the same universe.
Really?
Yes, they just announced that the other day. So
maybe I should watch that then. Okay,
that's interesting because they haven't seen any of like the robots or the hyperspace thing happen with in Killjoys.
I think that's just because in the Killjoys, and anybody who's interested and wants to check out Killjoys, especially in a gaming sense, if you go to the Sci-Fi website, they actually have it's not so much a wiki as it is like a source book about the setting of Killjoys right on their webpage. So you can, if you just click on the World of Killjoys link that's in the top, I think it's right-hand corner. I've only been there, like once or 1,000 times. It's a really nice laid out wiki about how the Killjoys are implemented, how the J is set up, and the J is the core worlds, and then you have the Quad, which is where most of the story takes place, and it's basically this one world and four smaller planets that are almost like moons. And it's just it's really neat setting. But to have those in the same place, I think part of the reason we haven't seen the android teleportation, which I think is the greatest sci-fi trope I've seen in probably 10 years. And that occurs in the Dark Matter show, where if you want to go someplace long distance but you don't want to actually do the travel, they have these hyperspace buoys that basically relay messages over long distances, and you download your consciousness into a simulated body on the other end of your travel destination.
Oh, yeah.
So you can get up, you can go climb that mountain you've always wanted to climb, you can do whatever, and then if you die, you just download back into your original body, and it's really neat. But I don't think they have that in Killjoys because the area you're talking about is so poor. It's
very much more destitute than we've seen in Dark Matter.
They don't have that life model decoy technology out there yet. So, all right.
No,
Chris,
yes,
your turn. You go.
What exactly am I doing? I'm sorry.
Favorite sci-fi novel, TV show, movie, all of the above, whatever.
Favorite sci-fi novel will always be George Orwell's 1984 because I think it gets more timely with every passing day.
Very much so.
Favorite television show, in terms of quality, there's a holy trinity for me between the original Twilight Zone, the original Outer Limits, and Black Mirror. In terms of in terms of what I would watch now, I sort of have on the classic Star Trek marathon on BBC America on mute while we're doing this. So I don't know if there'll be a more watchable show than the original classic Star Trek. As far as movies, as far as quality, I don't know if anybody will ever do better science fiction films than the films made by iconoclastic British filmmaker Peter Watkins. I just simply have never seen. I may have never seen a better film of any genre than The War Game, Punishment Park, and Privilege, and the rest of his work. And it's seriously unknown, especially in America, because I think that's the country that in his heart Watkins most wanted to speak to with his later works. But they're all just extraordinarily brilliant films, and they're so much a part of the time that they were created, and yet they speak so much to the 21st century, maybe even more so than they did the early 70s when he made them. They're just so extraordinarily well done. And I really wish that I had some sort of class that I could justify showing Peter Watkins films and giving a test. In fact, I may do that next semester while my bosses aren't looking, since they don't listen to this podcast.
Well, there you go.
And as terms of films that I could watch, you could wake me up at any time of the day or night and say, "Hey, Plan 9 from Outer Space is on," and I will get up and laugh my ass off at that. I never get tired of seeing the tombstones tip over, or the woman being dropped on the visible pillows at the bottom of the stage. I can tell you the life story of every single person in that film. It's a film that just kind of ate my life, and I don't regret it at all. And I'll throw in a bonus game for you as far as great science fiction game designs. And speaking of seriously underrated and undervalued things, my good friend Rob Toth's game Damnation Decade. Not enough people know how wonderful a game is where you can have a party of the $6 Million Man, Evil Knievel, and Ralph Furley from Three's Company teamed up to battle Sleestack.
That's the game I've always wanted to play my whole life.
Oh my God, yes, and written with such a knowing knowledge of both gaming and the world of 70s sci-fi. To this day, like the most hysterical I've ever laughed at something from a game book, I was reading the details of being the trucker class in the D20 rules. And kind of like when a paladin hits 4th level and you get to call your warhorse, when you hit 4th level as a trucker, you get to call your animal companion, which explains why you have a chimp or something in the truck with you.
Oh, holy BJ and the Bear.
Yes. That's a it reminds me of this wonderful time when Green Ronin was probably not quite as financially successful it is now, but it was just this wild we were all in this kind of wild, crazy D20 high when you could just walk in and say, "Hey, I've got this crazy idea," and if it was cool, they just publish it. I don't know if a game like Damnation Decade would ever see the light of day in the current climate, and it's a shame because it's so perfect at what it tries to do. And if 70s sci-fi ever meant anything to you, this is the game you've been waiting for your whole life.
Oh, okay, that's high praise, and I'm surprised you didn't mention Black Mirror when we were talking science fiction because
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it's a part of my holy trinity: Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Black Mirror.
Oh, I think maybe I cut out for that little bit. So, yeah, one of their episodes, San Junipero, was just nominated for an Emmy for Best TV Movie.
Absolutely well deserved. That's a show that should be required viewing.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Jacob, your turn.
I have to agree with some of what's already been said. I've really been enjoying for the Canadian films, Dark Matter and Killjoys. Those are some of the best. Some of the best I've seen in modern television, especially since Firefly, and I have always had a soft spot for the classics. So original series Star Trek, the Outer Limits especially. I always preferred the Outer Limits over Twilight Zone because Twilight Zone would often deal with psychological thrillers and mysteries, whereas Outer Limits was always hardcore science fiction, and that's what made me love it over Twilight Zone. And to the same degree, Black Mirror from the BBC. So I really enjoy those shows. In terms of books, I haven't read that much in the way of science fiction novels, so I'm really going to have to go back to my childhood and say Wrinkle in Time.
Oh, that's old school. All right.
Yeah.
And with the trailer we saw from the Disney film coming out, and I was like, wow, that's me. I'm there.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I didn't realize they're making a movie of that. That's interesting.
They just had the trailer released a week ago, in fact.
Okay.
Oh, and while we're plugging things, let's throw in a mention that our good friends at Kino Lorber are going to be putting out the original Outer Limits on Blu-ray. Season 1 is coming out later this year, and Season 2 is coming out early 2018. And they're already talking to the greatest expert on Outer Limits, David Shaw, about putting together extras for it.
Oh, okay.
I am interested.
Oh yeah, me too.
Nifty. Well, hey, Aid, I want to talk to you next. I want to point out to listeners that if they want to hear about your epic love of all things Doctor Who, you and Dan Abnett had a big Doctor Who love fest on our last podcast for the first 20 minutes, and it was wonderful, and I enjoyed listening to it. But I think we can take as written that you're a big Doctor Who fan.
I quite like it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, Doctor Who, definitely one of the ones. I'm going through my DVD collection at the moment. I'm just looking around. Okay, so right, let's start at one corner. Right, original Star Trek, Doctor Who, Buck Rogers TV series, 'cause it's fantastic. Lost in Space, absolutely bizarrely great. Thundercats, He-Man, Farscape, Firefly, Futurama. The Prisoner TV series, the original one, not the dodgy remake. Crikey. Yeah, that's it for TV series that I can see at the moment. But yeah, I really like. I really do love the original 1930s, 1940s serial. Like we were talking about the Buck Rogers stuff and the Flash Gordons and that kind of stuff. I have a big collection of lots of stuff they put in a box set of stuff I've never heard of before, like Rocky Road or Space Ranger or something like that.
Rocky Jones Space Ranger.
Yeah. It's
yes.
just like this is great. It's just so bizarre, and I just love that kind of that kitsch kind of era of sci-fi.
If you can get a hold of them across the pond, Mystery Science Theater 3000 tackled a couple of AirSats feature films made together of some sewed together Rocky Jones episodes, and they're both just hysterical.
Rocky Jones, yeah, all that stuff. I mean, say the original Buck Rogers, the original Flash Gordon stuff, I really like. The Buster Crab Gubbins, but yeah, the 80s Buck Rogers TV series I adore. I love the 80s because it's just so cool. It's just
so season 1 or season 2?
Season 1 more than season 2, but season 2's got some interesting episodes. But yeah, season 1's much better, I think, personally.
Right, cool.
More tweaking season 1 than there is in season 2. So that makes it better straight away.
Yeah. Walt, have you gone yet?
Yeah. Oh yes. Killjoys, Dark Matter.
That's right. Sorry.
Salvagers.
See, I don't watch a lot of modern sci-fi. I don't watch a lot of it. I don't know. I find it very difficult to get into stuff, and I don't know if it's just because of scheduling or just because it doesn't grab me as much as old stuff. I'd easily happily put on an old DVD of something that I've seen 1,000 times before than probably tune into any new show.
Well, let me ask you a question here. Okay, just see if this is just me. Okay, like not too long ago, people were raving about The Arrival.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it's a fine film, but I read the setup of it, and like 2 lines into the plot synopsis, I was sitting there thinking like, so let me guess, the military and the government will completely misunderstand the aliens' message, do something stupid and violent, and it'll turn out that the aliens wanted peace all along.
Sort of. It wasn't that the government misunderstood it. The government was actually very pro, let's keep this peaceful, let's find out what they want. It was individual troops and personnel on the ground that flipped out.
Well, I knew somewhere along the line the military would get the blame and would get the blame for all this, and I was just sitting here thinking, like, you know, is this the curse of having made it to nearly 50? In that, you know, this is not a fresh story or idea to me. You know, because I remember back, one of the first Twilight Zone episodes I ever got to see was one with Richard Basehart, where the big punchline is his real name is Adam, and the only other woman on the planet, his name is Eve, and the planet's name is Earth. And that you could, I mean, like my head exploded with an audible pop. I went like, whoa. And I was so shocked to like pick up like the Starlog and the magazines at the time and read like all these crusty 50-year-old science fiction fans talking about like, yeah, they did this back in the pulps back in 1930. And I'm like, oh my God, have I turned into that guy?
Yeah.
You know, is part of the problem maybe that, you know, we've consumed so much of that media, it's just so hard to get ahead of us?
I find not so much it's the plots as such. To be honest, for TV series more than anything else, I've been burnt so many times on stuff that's like, oh, it's the best thing ever, it's the best thing ever, and by the time we get it in the UK, it's been cancelled in the US. Or it's like, oh, it lasts 2 series and it just dies in its ass and nobody comes back to it. It's like, so I just thought, well, screw it, I'm not even going to bother. So Yeah, did you ever see the Ascension 3-parter they did, which had Trisha Heffler in it? That was a really cool concept. And then it ended, and it was open ended, and then that was it again. And you think, oh, what did you do that for? So that was pretty cool. But it had a nice 1950s vibe to it, which is always pretty good as well. But yeah, I agree with you with Black Mirror. Black Mirror is fantastic. I liked the first series more than the second series, and the third series was okay as well. But the first series was just so completely left field from stuff that we were getting in the UK that nobody had ever seen anything like it before. Really.
And yeah, it's still in that sweet spot where even if you see an episode that's maybe not as good as it usually is, you have to kick back and say, well, it's just better than anything else on television. Yeah, exactly. Gosh darn.
Right. That's right. You watch that and say even the worst episode is better than most stuff on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the cool thing about Black Mirror is because it is kind of like cutting edge and we're using technology as a constant thing, rather than kind of like extrapolate technology, but like, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if we had transporters that could do this stuff? It's kind of almost to the 5 minutes into the future stuff. So most of that stuff has never been written of before because we're not going completely bizarre for the technology. Yeah. So,
and they haven't forgotten the human element. That's one reason why I think this show will last. Because no matter how dated, some of the technology that pops up in like a Twilight Zone or an Outer Limits, the stories are about people. And that's why I think they last, even if you're sitting there the whole time going like, I can see the seams on the mask.
Yeah.
You're seeing that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, I've always, my dad's got a library of science fiction books in his bathroom, and it's all military sci-fi. So growing up, just read a lot of that stuff, Starship Troopers, Jerry Pournelle, etc. And it occurs to me that's one very popular genre that's hardly ever done right outside of, just books. I mean, Battlestar Galactica kind of came close, but then they sort of ruined it the way they everyone's a robot and Starbucks a space Jesus and see y'all later. It's just
well, the original Battlestar Galactica did okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It did. I mean, just the whole idea of, hey, we're doing World War II, the Pacific, but in outer space with robots. It's kind of cool. And then you bring in the space gods and their shiny spaceships, and it kind of
that to me was one of the great tragedies of the original Battlestar Galactica. I did a rewatch of those a couple of summers ago, and I have to admit I almost rage quit it by the third episode, where like humanity is literally on the brink of extinction, and Dama is on the bridge of humanity's last warship telling bedtime stories to Will Wheaton and his little robot dog.
Yeah.
That wasn't Will Wheaton.
It wasn't?
No.
Oh.
It's Noah Hathaway.
Yeah, running gag with me that it's Will Wheaton. Running gag with me. But
way to betray you.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, that's his resume. Okay, that's fine. He's employed and I'm not. I got to salute the man.
Well, you're unemployed. You're on summer vacation.
My last point about Galactica is by the time they bring in the space gods and it just decides to like roll around in the fact that it's the 70s and they decide to do like Bermuda Triangle in space and all of a sudden Adama can bend spoons with his mind like Uri Geller, then it finally becomes a show I want to watch. And of course, by then it's canceled.
But you did get Galactica 1980 after it.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
You did.
You got Galactica 1980 after that,
oh,
didn't you?
Dear God.
With the super speedy scout people that can jump in the air and the flying bikes. I mean, what more do you want?
If the two story editors of that used to have a blog, which has unfortunately got offline, and if it weren't, the only way I made it through all 11 episodes of that, which felt like 89, it was knowing the background stories of just how completely, utterly ramshackle and off the rails terrible that show was behind the scenes.
Yeah, you kind of tell just watching it that something had gone very wrong at some point.
Well, it's a different show every week. I think when I did my rewatch of that, I was joking that like the only show in the 70s that Galactica 1980 didn't try to be in 11 episodes is 60 Minutes. And I think episode 12 would have been like Cousin Oliver and Lauren Green sitting around talking about, stagflation or whatever.
I mean, that's the thing with like 80s, especially 70s and 80s sci-fi, is they do seem to be very much in the mold of classic Trek, where we've got the omnipotent aliens that do everything because that's what we want to do. And I know I've been flicking through the Star Trek history books stuff to find out stuff for what I'm doing in writing. And there's like 2 episodes of Next Generation that come up that were written for the Star Trek 2 episodes.
Yes,
and they
indeed.
stand out like a sore thumb about what their content is. Because like, oh, there's somebody pretending to be the devil, but it's not really the devil. And you go, right, that's so weird. Why is that in the 5th season of Star Trek Next Generation?
Yeah.
Bizarre. And it seems to be that's the kind of like the thing they tended to do back then. It's like, oh well, okay, we'll just take any other myth and legend we've kind of done, stick a couple of horns on it, make the guy green, and we'll wang that in there. That'd be fine.
Well, that's one reason why if you look back at 70s sci-fi, like I said, these shows trying to rip off Star Trek, and then there's a whole other subgenre of shows which are basically trying to rip off The Fugitive, like The Immortal and The Incredible Hulk. Looking back, my appreciation of British sci-fi from that period is really appreciated. Because while we were watching, we were watching stuff like The $6 Million Man, which was good for what it was. You guys had Blake 7 and 1990 and The Last Train and stuff like that I have copies of because they fell off the back of a truck.
Survivor's original TV series, The Tripods, was pretty decent in the 80s.
Yeah.
Crikey. There's quite a few that BBC did a lot of sci-fi back then, and that seems to be now that all of their money's just ploughed into Doctor Who, and singing competitions, because that's all we get on the UK TV. Yeah?
And God bless you, Martin Landau. I throw Space 1999 in as a British show. There's still never been anything for me as trippy as that first season of Space 1999.
He just passed.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
God bless you.
Hey, I got something I want to read relative to Battlestar Galactica. Here's a quote from George R.R. Martin. Battlestar Galactica ends with, "God did it. Looks like someone skipped writing 101 when you learned that a Deus Ex Machina is a crappy way to end a story. Yeah, sometimes the journey is its own reward. I certainly enjoyed the journey with BSG, but damn it. Doesn't anyone know how to write an ending anymore? Writing 101, kids. Adam and Eve, God did it. It was all a dream. I've seen Clarion Writing Workshop, left stunned and bleeding for turning in stories with those endings." I think he's got a point.
I still love Chris Pramus's blog entry after having seen the last episode of Battlestar Galactica and talking about how he wanted to see like the mythical first show of the next season where somebody finally gets tuberculosis and then goes looking for whoever came up with the idea of getting rid of all their technology.
Yeah. We're on a new planet we haven't been to before, and first guy who gets a staph infection is going to be like, "Motherfucker, this was not a good idea."
It's weird. It's what you got to wonder what they were aiming for. If that was like there was the intended ending, or just had to be, oh crap, we need to wrap it up and get rid of it.
That shows every sign of having been slapped together. Because really, you have to be like a courier at your door, waiting on the script pages, desperate to say, "All right, I'm going to base the whole episode around a Hendrix song I dug when I was high in college."
Good point. Yeah. But that's the crazy thing is like Babylon 5 was going to be cancelled season 4, and the last episode of Babylon 5 in season 4 where they have the flash forward to 100 years in the future.
Yeah.
And holographic Garibaldi managed to trick the guy into blowing himself up effectively.
I love that.
That was brilliant, exactly. And it's like, okay, that was it, fair enough. And then we get another series, and it's like, well, my God, you're not going to live up to that episode now. What have you done to yourself? So they did tie up some storyline stuff, but still, that was just a bloody great send off if that would have been it.
Hey, how was the Babylon 5 RPG? Anyone play that?
Which one?
The original one, I liked what it was trying to do. I remember that it had like a skill in there for manipulating alien cultures to your will, and I just had to admire that there was a game you could actually do something like this.
Is that the one that was done? I can't believe what the
Wireframe and Chameleon Eclectic got credit for. Yeah,
that's what it is. Yes.
But as I said earlier in the cast, I could never understand why they used the combat system from Millennium's End, which was like Chameleon Eclectic's techno thriller game, which was this like really hyper detailed bullet damage system. I don't know why you need that in a universe where people have plasma guns, which usually just kill you with one shot.
Hit location.
It hit you in the arm and you die. It hit you in the toe and you die. It hit you in the nose and you die. So 20 years on, I still don't understand that design decision.
You know, there are some design decisions from back in the day, and if Chuck Rice were here, he would call me a motherfucker for saying this. But sometimes I look at games that happened before there was a wide distribution of OCD medication, and I'm just like, that's why we have all these tables.
Have you guys ever seen the Black Library Dark Heresy? Any of you guys either saw it or play it?
No.
I've heard of it. I've seen it. I've never played it.
So Warhammer 40K universe, we were playing in a prolonged campaign for a while, but they have random tables that deal with hit location, and if you do an inordinate amount of damage to certain things, you roll on the random table and get unique methods of death. Like I think it was in the 80s. If you rolled in the 80s on a percentile dice, you got superheated plasma fills the skull cavity, causing the eyes to burst like superheated eggs. You know, I mean, it's stuff like that. I mean, that's really. I could see where Rob Schwalb from the Demon Lord game probably got some of his inspiration.
Oh.
Hey guys, we've been going for over an hour at this point. Any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
I will say, which I forgot to mention a while ago, the Black Mirror stuff. That reminds me, I still haven't yet played a decent Paranoia campaign, and I really, really want to. Going for anything that's kind of like that oppressive, kind of like you're under the thumb government, conspiracy stuff, and all that malarkey. Paranoia is a fantastic setting for a science fiction RPG.
That was a comedy game.
Well, it can be. You can make it as comedy as you want to, and you can play the zappy one, which is basically everyone just kills each other at the drop of a hat because they want to, and then you can play it. Yeah, that's kind of where the first version came from, and then they started straying off into like more straight games, which basically become like the Brazil film and that kind of thing, and it got a lot more darker, and it was basically. Yeah, every day is the grind. Every year is the year 314, and nothing's ever changed because everything's the same because we just erase history as it's going along. And I love that kind of really black, dark humor stuff that was going on in that system. And I've yet to find actually play a decent campaign of it because everyone I know is what I've kind of just to say no, we all just basically end up with us fighting each other because people get pissed off about you being shot in the back every time you're trying to line the shot up for somebody else.
There is no way to run a campaign of Paranoia.
I think it
is designed to be a one-shot, one-session kind of thing.
Yeah,
you play an adventure, and that's about as much as you're going to get.
Yeah, I say I've yet to play it properly, and I think I can do it. I think I can actually do a campaign. I think I can do it. I'm determined to say, like we were mentioning before the podcast, like the recent political times at the moment, it just seems to be crying out for this kind of oppressive stuff going on. Where like everything's fake news. There's nothing going on. It's all double talk. It just really needs to be done.
I think we just discovered if Abe was Captain Ahab, this would be his white whale.
Yeah, could be.
So, anybody else? Closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a nice thank you to all of the past creators that have dabbled in sci-fi RPGs and media because, 40 years later, we're still talking about Mark Miller's Traveler, even though we're all not fans of it. I'm still jazzed on Guy McLemore and the original Faza Crew's Star Trek design, all, to the job that Rob Toth did on Damnation Decade. So even if I don't always understand your design decisions 30 years after the fact, isn't it great to have the benefit of hindsight on these things? There's a lot of love and a lot of work put into these, and it says something to keep a hold of somebody's imagination for decades. So thank you guys for your hard work and for doing something that has lasted in my memory and always will.
Hey, Chris, let me ask you a question. This is sort of esoteric RPG stuff, and the answer is probably no. But Wing Commander, it's a video game from back in the day.
Yeah.
Really terrible movie, but it always seemed to me like that would be a world that would be particularly well suited to RPGs like MechWarrior or Battletech or Battlestar Galactica or Firefly, but it just never happened. Did you ever hear any rumors about, they've been in the industry for, much longer than most of us on this call?
No, and that's odd because I don't. Forgive me, gentlemen. I don't know. I can't call up your histories immediately, but I myself survived that age when everything was getting turned into a card game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't even remember it ever getting a card game. And good lord, I mean, Tomb Raider got a card game because hey, it's like the video game, only you have to buy it piece by piece, and it's slower, and you need other people to actually play with you. Isn't that an improvement? So yeah,
I vaguely remember something Wing Commandery, not outside the computer games, but I can't think of what it would be.
Well,
Board game.
yeah,
it might have just been the movie or did they actually do sequels? I think they did, didn't they?
I don't. Did they?
I think they did straight to video stuff.
They did one sequel.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know Chris Roberts has moved on, is doing an MMO called Star Citizen now, which has been we could do a whole podcast just about the crowdfunding campaign for that. But yeah, apparently the game's not running yet. It's still in beta, but you can buy vehicles.
Spend $250,000 on it just to sake of Yeah, it's like, hey, I've got 7,000 spaceships. What to do with them? Well, not much.
Yeah.
Let's face it, everything's in beta. Oh, it's been released. It's in beta.
Yeah.
You just paid for the beta. That's all.
Well, any closing thoughts?
Just a big shout out, even though my dog is going to agree with me. Big shout out to, and I know he'll never hear this, but whatever, screw him. I both love him and hate him, George Lucas, because he's the one who introduced me to Kurosawa movies.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. I was reading Warren Ellis's blog years and years ago, and this is like Hollywood rumors that probably aren't true, but are, Kurosawa enters George Lucas's office sometime in 1979, 1980, and he's always wanted to meet him, and he's shaking his hand, thanking him for all his works, and Kurosawa doesn't say a word, just sits down in the chair in George Lucas's shag-carpeted office, and just looks at him and taps his foot rhythmically. Until Lucas says, oh yes, and writes him a check, and then they have a conversation. I suspect it never actually happened, but it's kind of a fun story.
I've always been fond of the young man that ran up to Sir Alec Guinness in an airport and said, "I've seen Star Wars 100 times. Can I have your autograph? I will give it to you on the condition you agree never to watch it again."
Yeah.
Okay, well, on that happy thought, I've got to pick my cut from daycare. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks again to our listeners. Please check out our Patreon. Just do a search for BAMF Podcast on patreon.com, and feel free to throw us some of your spare change if you like these podcasts. And we will catch you next time, hopefully with Owen Stevens, talk about Starfinder on the BAMF Podcast. Thank you very much.